My name is Josh Brahm with Equal Rights Institute, and we're taking a close look at the Reversing Roe documentary. Let's take a look at the next clip.
I think that the traditions of the Republican Party are the traditions of an individual person to choose what he wishes as long as it doesn't infringe upon other people.
So in the context here, you've got a pro-choice person talking about how the Republican Party wasn't always pro-life. But there's something kind of awkward about this clip. So he says, we generally believe in rights for people as long as those rights don't infringe on other people. And I'm like, yeah. You know why pro-life people are against abortion? Because they think it infringes on another person. Like, infringe until the point of death. And we disagree about whether or not bodily autonomy arguments succeed in justifying abortion. Speaking of which, let's take a quick look at some of the bodily autonomy arguments made toward the beginning of this documentary.
If you didn't have control of your own body, we weren't sure what kind of right you could ask for.
Yeah, so I'm going to show a couple of clips here. So what do you mean by control over your own body? I believe that you should generally have the right to do what you want to do with your body, but clearly there are exceptions to that. This sounds like an absolute claim that you should have the right to do anything you want with your own body. And most pro-choice people even agree that's not true. And you can see that when you look at opinion polls on abortion, showing that most pro-choice people think that late-term abortions are not just wrong, they should be against the law. So like you see in Gallup's latest abortion poll, where 65% of people said that second trimester abortion should be illegal, and 81% said that third trimester abortion should be illegal. So if the phrase control over your own body equates to legal abortion rights, then this statement that you need abortion rights to ask for any other rights is clearly incorrect. For example, women correctly got the right to vote before they got the right to have abortions. Like, not all rights are intrinsically tied to abortion. Let's take a look at this next clip.
It is a political issue. The state means to control our bodies. We produce the soldiers, we produce the workers, and they fear the loss of that control.
So this quote is stranger to me. This strikes me as a much more bizarre claim than the previous one. Like, the government wants control over women's bodies because they produce workers and soldiers? Like, I can completely understand, people being angry at the government over the Vietnam War. But this idea that abortion rights are in question because the government needs women to keep pumping out soldiers is a level of conspiracy theory that is very hard to take seriously.
It's the basis of democracy that you control your own body. And it's the basis of hierarchy and totalitarian regimes that you don't.
Okay, again, it is reasonable to put some limits on bodily autonomy. Like, most people agree that there should be some limits on abortion rights. Most people agree that women shouldn't be allowed to take thalidomide while pregnant because it causes severe birth defects, originally pointed out by Dr. Rich Papard. To then compare those reasonable views with totalitarian governments is a ridiculous overreach. It's a classic, people with my views like freedom and people who disagree with me are like Nazis kind of an argument. Pro-choice people can do a lot better than that. And some of them, like Judith Jarvis Thompson, have. So if you want to learn more about how to think and understand and respond to bodily rights arguments, including the more philosophically rigorous ones and the ones that you saw in those clips, you can go to equalrightsinstitute.com/bodily-rights, which is a landing page that links to a lot of different really helpful resources for pro-life people on how to have better conversations with pro-choice people about bodily rights arguments. So let's take a look at some of the things that were said about Roe versus Wade.
The basic constitutional question is whether or not an unborn fetus is a person, isn't it?
At one point, a justice had said to me, "When do you believe human life begins?" And I said, "Well, Your Honor, we did not try to say exactly what moment that was. There is no one answer to that. Different religions have different answers to that question, but there is no legal standard that said at this point the fetus becomes a human. So the question is, who gets to make the decision? Is it the woman or is it the government? And my position has always been it's not the government."
Okay, so now apply that argument to slavery. Like, some religions disagreed about the personhood of Africans. This might be politically incorrect, but if you just Google what Brigham Young, the former head of the LDS Church, had to say about black people, you're going to read some really uncomfortable quotations. So religious people disagreed about the topic. And obviously some religious people, like William Wilberforce, strongly believed that Africans were just as fully human as white people. So what if we applied this argument that the government should never make a decision on whether or not an African is a person to that topic? So, like, philosophically speaking, I don't believe that the government can give transcendent rights. It's not the government saying that African Americans are persons that makes them persons. They are persons at an intrinsic level because of the kind of thing they are. But the government can recognize that and then protect African Americans from being mistreated. And that's what pro-life people believe should happen with the unborn. Just because different groups disagree doesn't mean that we should throw up our hands and give up trying to apply good science and philosophy to this question.
The Roe decision held that women have the right to terminate a pregnancy in the first 2 trimesters. And then it's only at the 3rd trimester the state has the right to prohibit abortion except when necessary to preserve a woman's life or health.
Okay, so that's sort of true, but either Linda Greenhouse or the editors failed to give you the full picture here because, as they well know, another Supreme Court decision related to abortion was handed down on the same day as Roe versus Wade, called Doe versus Bolton. And in that case, the word health, the limiting factor on 3rd trimester abortions in Roe, is actually defined. What does health mean? Well, from the decision itself, quote, "We agree with the district court that the medical judgment may be exercised in the light of all factors: physical, emotional, psychological, familial, and the woman's age relevant to the well-being of the patient. All these factors may relate to health," end quote. So what that did was created a huge loophole. An abortion practitioner, like the one that the chaplain earlier was sending people to who, quote, "always found it necessary to do an abortion," end quote, could say that any given woman needed a late-term abortion because of vague psychological or familial reasons. Do you think that's what most people would expect when they heard Linda Greenhouse say that Roe makes 3rd trimester abortions legal only in situations where the health of the mother is at risk?
When Roe went through, it was a shock to everyone to go so far over the other side, to put everything in the woman's hand and essentially dismantle the laws. You couldn't now, in any other state, you couldn't pass laws against abortion, not forbidding it directly.
Now, this is true. This is Roe versus Wade is a thing that shocked both sides of the debate. This was so much more than what pro-choice activists were hoping for with this decision, because remember what was going on in the years prior to 1973. Different states were passing different kinds of laws on abortion. So some states made abortion legal in general. Some made it legal maybe only in the case of rape. You had other states, ban abortion. So you had like different things going on in different states. What Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton did was literally wiped the slate clean. It took every single state law and took them off the table and replaced it with this one decision that said that abortion is a constitutional right based on the right to privacy, and abortion needs to be legal in every single state, regardless of what they decided before, regardless of what their society or their lawmakers had decided. Abortion is legal. It's a basic right, basically, especially in the first 2 trimesters. And then there's sort of this health of the mother exception for 3rd trimester. So what the chaplain just said there is exactly correct. Like, pro-choice people were stunned by how much the Supreme Court expanded abortion rights.
There's a lot of traumatic memory of things that have happened in the abortion movement, of clinics being bombed, providers being targeted.
You are a killer, condemning your life.
So here's a tip for pro-life people. Do you want to change the minds of women having abortions, or even the people who work at the clinic? If you do, then there are literally hundreds of better options than saying you are a killer into a bullhorn. And that doesn't make me wishy-washy. I want the pro-life movement, including every single activist and sidewalk counselor, to be as effective as possible. I want to save as many lives as possible. I want us to end abortion as soon as possible. I'm arguing that this particular thing that a pro-life advocate can say or yell will save far fewer lives than the sidewalk counselor who appears safe and tells the people coming in, I'm sorry you're having a rough day today. I'd love to talk to you about some free resources that are available down the road. And there are lots of different versions of that approach, and there might be a slightly better version of that. But you see the macro difference between that approach and you are a killer. And if you don't believe me, read Abby Johnson's book, Unplanned. As either David B. Wright or Sean Carney has said later, that was an amazing A/B test between different kinds of sidewalk strategies while Abby was still working in that clinic. Because you had the people with the Grim Reaper costume, literally, and the big signs and the yelling, were there sometimes. And then sometimes you'd have Sean Carney's peaceful group of 40 Days for Life type people would come and pray and reach out to the clinic workers and the patients. And when Sean's group was there, women were willing to talk to them and babies were being saved. And by the time Abby Johnson had her experience watching an abortion on an ultrasound machine and felt like she had to quit, she knew by that point that Sean and his group were safe people. And that's why she drove to their office instead of disappearing and trying to deal with everything on her own. So, we've spent at Equal Rights Institute a lot of our last year producing a sidewalk counseling course, and we're in the midst of making that right now. And it's going to come out next spring. And if you're interested in learning about what we have been learning through a lot of tests about what are the most effective techniques for saving lives on sidewalks, you ought to subscribe to our email list because we're going to be sending out announcements closer to when that is being published.